got 4 guys working along the rack back out, sorting the hooks and grabbing them and putting them on the rack one by one. It's kind of crazy and everything's flying around. And we're on the 3rd day of a 4-day trip, and we're about 100 miles offshore, and this guy Miles is next to me, and he's working with the hooks, and he cuts off this gangin to replace this hook. He cuts off this gangin to replace the hook, and the hook flies up in the air, the boat takes a roll, and the hook goes in his eye. So you got the hook with the shank against his cheek and the gangin drilling down, and Jesus, Miles, you know, God, let's get you down below. And he's sitting there like this, and we get him down below, and the boat's rolling and rocking, and he sits in the forecastle. This is about 1 or 2 in the afternoon now, and he sits in the forecastle. We got to finish hauling the gear. Roger gets on the radio to the, what do we do? And the guy says, well, get him comfortable and then bring him in. We'll get a doctor down to the dock when you arrive in Gloucester. So Miles is sitting in the forecastle like this, you know, with a hook on his eye. And we finish hauling that string of gear, and then we rig the boat out and everything. We steam in. It's like a 10-hour steam across Georges into Gloucester. Pretty nice night. We're taking watches. Miles is down in the forecastle like this, you know, with a hook out of his eye. 10 hours he's sitting down there. He doesn't go to sleep. He's just holding on. You okay, Miles? Yeah, I'm okay, I'm okay. You know, and he got the hook hanging out of his eye. And, you know, and we're really worried. And we get to the dock, and we pull in. The doc's there with his bag, and he climbs down the ladder and gets in the boat, and we're all gunning around. And Roger, the skipper, is crazy. He wants to cut the hook out himself. Don't do that, Roger. And Miles is sitting there like this, and the doctor looks at him, and he looks at all of us, and he starts to smile, and he says, Miles, why don't you open your eye? Miles opens his eye, and the hook falls right out.
We'll see how quickly I can read this, because I just wrote this morning. Get a little closer. Okay. I really didn't spend very much time at the event this year talking about my own experiences fishing in Alaska. I was talking more about my family experiences, and there were so many memories that came back to me that I wanted to call this blood, and it's just kind of a deluge of the places that I've been, the fishing that I've done on my own. So the first thing that came to mind was Prince William Sound, age 16, sick from going around Gore Point, standing kind of lost and dumb in reindeer, ready to stack corks. I remember College Fjord, and I liked that all the glaciers had names where I might someday go to school. My friends from Homer fished on some of the other seiners, and we all sat around on the deck of the boat in Valdez on the 4th of July. I remember the payphones at the top of the dock. In fact, I remember many hours of conversations on payphones at the top of many docks, cold but still calling. Earlier, Cook Inlet, riding down the beach in Kasilof, on 4-wheelers with my family, my mom, aunts, uncles, grandparents. My sister sometimes took the salmon out of the set net and let them go. Back at the homestead beach site, the fish got sorted into totes for a visit to the cannery, the Kenai Cannery, to get the fish tickets and cookies if we were lucky. About age 18, Petersburg, Cape Gardner, not sure if I have that right, Teneke, Sitka, Juneau, Frederick Sound, Bears at the Dumpahuna, Faranoff Warm Springs, Goddard Hot Springs, more friends, new friends, time at the tender, sorting salmon. I was learning how to cook a little bit better by then. FB Northern Light, no drinkable water. I remember backstacking gear against the cabin, which also meant that the head was blocked. Easier for the rest of the crew to pee off the side of the boat. I made the skip man take me ashore. FB Agave, the long trips to Southeast. Listening to depressing weather reports and trying to think about what I would most like to puke back up, because inevitably I would spend quite a bit of time holding onto the open door of the cabin and making sure I got enough water so I could puke that back up too. The dreaded Gore Point, Nuka Bay, crossing Prince William Sound, Kayak Island, Cape St. Elias, Mount St. Elias, my favorite mountain in Alaska, Yakutat, Cross Sound, and finally getting down there. Georgia Straits, FB Georgia Straits, about age 20. A piece of trash, metal tender, hired for the set net sites at Callaghan Island and Snug Harbor. I remember when I first realized how shallow the flats are up at Baker Point. I did a lot of driving on that tender, about 10 hours at a time. The other crew picked up the salmon off the scouts at night. I delivered food, cooked, and drove. Snug Harbor Cannery, bear tours. I think I spent about 2 summers there. Kodiak herring, about age 25, aggressive and windy. We lost an anchor and drifted quickly back to hit the bow of a steel tender. Trying to hold buoys between the fiberglass and the inevitable smash, broke part of the rail, heard a few obscenities. No one slept all night on any of the boats, waiting for watching for moving anchors. As we were making a set there, or driving around defensively about 30 seconds pre-opening, someone on another skiff screamed at me and flipped me off, and I just remember waving and smiling. Toby getting to look for my favorite glass balls. I remember my father looking panicked and extremely nervous when he couldn't get in radio contact with his pilot. It was too foggy to fly, and he'd already experienced the loss of one pilot, and Billy got a panicked lecture when he finally announced his presence a little later. So really this flood is just beginning. I remember so many boats: the Roberta M, the Custatan, the Tacoma, Matt Dowdy's boats, the Morning Light, the Crescent Moon, the Malamute Kid, the Kupernoff, the Shrike, the De Niro. Lots of boats, lots of old friends, family, new friends, and new places in Alaska to visit. They all make a lovely lineup that helps me define what it is about the Alaska water that is really who I am. It's what moves me towards everything I do, and it's almost always about the people. I have to keep all those Carhartts, gloves, old t-shirts, the reindeer. You never know when the water will call you. So we'll see you next year, hopefully. Maybe see you guys in Kodiak. Next up on the story list, we'll have to see what happens this year.
Well, this is a first. I finally got Veronica on stage. And this is an experiment because we approach this not from a reader's point of view, but from a storytelling point of view. And speaking of points of view, we always seem to have two different ones. And so we want to tell you about a day in 1982.
Because I was pregnant.
I forgot because she was pregnant. And on this particular day, I remember my concern was that this was my first year as my own skipper, and I was out there trying to figure out how to make this boat work. And it was the same. I told the story last night. It was actually the same year that we broke down 8 out of 12 periods that we fished. And so we had an old boat. It was a kind of an old wooden boat. It was lightly ribbed. It was a plug. It wasn't even supposed to fish. And so my mind was on that as we talked about going out together.
Yeah.
And your mind was
My mind was on the weather. Since I was pregnant, I couldn't use any seasickness pills or any scopolamine. And when we decided to fish together a couple of years earlier, I didn't realize I was so sensitive to emotion. And so we bought in. We were going to do it as a team, and I was damned if I was going to keep me from being out of the water. So I used scopolamine constantly. Well, when I was pregnant, I couldn't do it. And so I ended up staying on shore for the first couple of periods, but then it was a big day.
It was supposed to be a big day.
And they were predicting flat, calm seas.
Seas to 3 feet.
Yep, 1 to 3 feet, no wind. I said, I gotta go. I can't stand not being on the boat with the splashers and the bobbers and all the hits. It was just, I love being there. So I said I'd try it.
So we head out of the river, and my thought all along is that, it's going to be a big day. I need to follow, because I was really green, and I needed to follow the guy I knew that knew the most, and that was the guy by the name of Thor. Figures. And Thor just happened to be the first person I ever set a foot on a boat with, and I knew him to be one of the best fishermen in the fleet, and so I'm following Thor. The problem is Thor's got his new boat, which goes about 15 knots, and I've got my old boat, which goes about 8. So I followed Thor as long as I could see him, which was like half an hour. And then but I knew he was heading southwest, and I could hear him on the radio. We were on the same radio group. And so we ended up heading out the river. Now, also on the boat was a green deckhand of mine, who was a teacher friend of mine, who, after this season, and especially after this particular day, really talks about fishing it with just nothing but fear in his eyes. And so
He likened it to going to war, is what he told me.
yeah. He didn't know. Every time we went out, he thought we were going to die. And he was actually pretty right. We were really close. That's a good time. So, especially on that boat. So we head out into the Cook Inlet, and the weather changes.
By 7 o'clock, we were in, I think it was
Understand.
probably 5-foot seas.
4 foot. 6. And an hour later, it was a little bit higher. Long higher. And so, and it just kept building and building and building. And I heard Thor on the radio say something along the lines of, so I figured, okay, I'll head more southwest, which was right into the middle rip. And if you read my poem last night, that's not the place you want to be. Meanwhile, by then, Veronica had a whole different view of the day. I'm hanging on to the wheel.
I'm looking in the bucket.
Yeah, say that again.
I'm looking in the bucket. I'm doing more than looking.
She's got a black bucket. She's sitting behind me at the table, and my deckhand and his girlfriend, who came out for the day because it was supposed to be a flat calm day, are riveted and they're kind of pressed against the door so they don't get thrown around the cabin. And I'll tell you about them in a second. But we keep on going, and at one point we hit 3 of the worst waves in a row that I've ever encountered. And in fact, I was writing about them in Aaron's workshop yesterday. We came up over a wave, and we had a boat with a short bow, and all of a sudden there's another wave, and in the rip, they're real steep. They're not necessarily the biggest waves we've ever seen. They're steep, and we end up in the trough, and we drop into the trough, and the wave breaks over the windshield, and everything goes completely gray. I can't see anything, and the whole boat slams, and the first thing I think of is, this is a lightly ribbed boat. This is not a boat that I want to be doing this with. And so the windshield wipers are trying to sweep a wave away, and I can't do it very well. And it clears. We're still moving in, and I'm hoping that it'll clear in time for me to see what I can do. And what I see is that I can't do anything. And there's another wave right behind it. And so as soon as it clears, we're off in the air again. And by then I'm kind of throttling back, and I'm thinking, this is not good. And meanwhile, Veronica is
Growing up.
okay, different perspectives. And so, but I don't know that because I'm paying attention. And then the second wave, and I was writing this, and I recall one of the things that happened. I think it was on the second wave. A piece of about 2-foot kelp slapped the windshield as we were inside the wave. It just kind of went whack and hung there for a second. It was like, I don't think I should be seeing this right now. And then it washed away as the water came down, and we ended up, and I'm throttling back and just going, I've got to do something. Well, the first thing I thought of as a brand new skipper is, I need help. And so I looked around, and I literally just kind of went, where can I find help? And I looked, and Veronica's got her head.
Yeah. I'm growing up. I've never seen Pat look as scared.
I was pretty terrified. And because I knew if we did it a couple more times that we're going to not make it. And I looked to Michael and his girlfriend Rebecca, and their faces. And Rebecca lived a long time in Hawaii, and she was very tan, and she was about as white as a ghost. They were both looking at me like, "What are you going to do?" Yeah, and they didn't say anything. Veronica didn't say anything except the guttural sounds that kind of echoed out of the bucket over the engine. And so the next wave, and so there's no help here. And so I turned forward, and we came off this next wave, and I went, I cannot keep doing this to this boat. And so I saw the next wave behind it, and I knew that one was gonna hit us again, and it did. But I started turning the wheel. I was hoping that the waves would in the rip, they're always jumbled, and you never know where they're coming from. And I didn't know. And so I turned the wheel, and we ended up riding the next one off and kind of quartering it. And at that point, I figured, okay, we're out of here. We're leaving. Run away. And about that time, over the radio, what was maybe just a few minutes later, over the radio comes a kid's voice. And it's an emergency call saying that the boat is breaking up, and so there's this conversation that happens on the radio that kind of comes and goes because of what we're paying attention to and dealing with. Now we're surfing the waves, trying to get back to the river, and And so we're still really paying attention, I'm paying attention to trying to figure out what's going on, and this radio conversation happens about this boat that's broken up, and about 10 minutes after that, I see debris in the water. Well, it turns out it was all bogus. The kid ended up getting a stern warning from the authorities. It was a bogus call. And what we saw was a barge, a set-net barge, a wooden set-net barge that had broken free and broken up in the waves. But we didn't know that. So
By this time, we were in 24-footers.
Yes.
I mean, the seas really
They were-
did pick up. We had waves coming that were the sizes of houses. And we were green, both of us, all of us were.
in more ways than one.
Yeah. Seas from 1 to 3 feet.
Yeah,
Never really
seas, yeah, we're going, Veronica, I've had a few expletives in between vomits for the weathermen. But I'm also, starting to get concerned about her throwing up so much because she's pregnant. And, that's in the back of my mind, way in the back of my mind, but it's there, and I know it was in the forefront of yours. Anyway, so what happened was we ended up making it. We realized the waves are pushing us so far north. We've got to go northeast to get to the river. We can't get into the river because it's just too powerful. And before we know it, we're at the north end of Calvin Island. And I say, let's just duck behind the island and get in the lee of the wind. And it didn't take long after making that left turn that happened as the seas backed off. And so get on the radio, and we start going in by the set nets because we don't know where to go. We have no idea. There's some set nets there, and so I see a boat that I know, and so I call the guy, and he's like the first in line. There's 3 boats behind him, and I just ask, "Can we please tie off to you? My wife's pregnant, and we're kind of worn out after being out there." And he said, "Sure," and so we end up. Actually, did we tie up to a set net scow? No, we tied off to those guys. And then
We get a radio call from a stranger who's a set nets off the Calicut, and he had overheard Pat's conversation, saying that his wife was on board, still throwing up after about 7 hours. And we were really concerned, and the gentleman said, "I'll come and pick her up and bring her on dry land." And so he came up with his skiff, took Pat and I off the boat. As soon as I hit land, I stopped throwing up. He took us to his shed, his fishing cabin, which was probably 10 by 10.
yeah,
And it was heated.
Had a bed.
It had a bed and a table and a wood stove. And Pat sat down on the bed because there was no other place to sit and instantly fell asleep.
It was 95 degrees, and I was a little tired.
I was in the cabin with this gracious man whom I did not know, his wife who didn't speak English, she was native, and there were about 7 children.
Yeah.
And I stayed there visiting with him for until Pat got his good nap.
2-3 hours.
2-3 hours.
And so we woke up, he took us back, and we found out later that Michael and Rebecca had decided that they had come so close to dying that they needed to take advantage of every available opportunity, and they spent the entire time on board making love.
Last chance.
On my boat. Very different perspective. I think that, and then we went back. We basically spent the night on the boat and went home the next morning. And the next morning was flat calm. Flat calm. So that's. Yeah.
I got back on the boat, but it was not that season. It was after Kessler was born, I deckhanded 1 more year and then had to hang it up because my stomach never could accommodate the water, and I just had to be the dry land support. So I became a fishwife on land.
So there you go, 2 different perspectives. Thank you.
After all these sea stories, this is going to be a little bit different. I'm actually only an honorary fisher poet. So here's a cowboy poem. I was hoping that Ron McDaniel was going to be here, but he had to leave early. So I wanted him to know that he wasn't the only cowboy poet here. There's a little story. My first time in the Northwest was working on cattle ranches in eastern Oregon.
So this is a little poem called The Grocery Business. It begins with epitaph from another poem by a Polish poet. The epigraph goes like this. First, I went down to the street by means of the stairs. Just imagine it. By means of the stairs. It's from a poem called A Ballad of Going Down to the Store. Miron Białaszewski. The grocery business. I was a cowboy once, if you can call a green 19-year-old from upstate New York a cowboy. I worked for Leo Flower. He ran cattle on the North Fork of the John Day in eastern Oregon. It was straight out of a movie. He was a local cattle baron, and I was his young sidekick. Some days we'd ride for miles, repairing fence or moving cattle from one of his ranches to another. Long hours in the saddle. Leo would talk. He'd been a logger, a topper. He'd fallen over 100 feet from the top of a ponderosa pine and lived, but had to learn to walk again. So then he became a barber. He cut hair in Nevada, Oregon, Idaho. Later he worked as a timber cruiser, made some good money, saved it, and bought back the family ranch. Every month, he'd give me a haircut, and he gave me a lot of advice. Evenings in the bunkhouse, I would read Darwin and Freud, Santayana's The Sense of Beauty, by a kerosene lamp. According to Leo, with my book learning and strict methodical approach to things, I was ideally suited to being a storekeeper. And he offered to set me up in the grocery business. However, with my limited grasp of economics, I couldn't see how the nearby town, population 250, could support a second grocery store. Besides, it didn't fit in with my plans. So I demurred and eventually moved on. Years later, in San Francisco, reading the Polish poet Białaszewski's Ballad of Going Down to the Store, I thought about Leo and the grocery business. I entered a complete store. Lamps of glass were glowing. I hardly remembered a single word of Leo's advice, but even now, I could tell you exactly the words of the poem.
This is a found poem. It's a compendium of a bunch of obituaries out of the Kodiak Daily Mirror and the Anchorage Daily News from about 6-7 years ago. I took 5 obituaries, and I just took all the lines from these obituaries of a bunch of different people, and I just stacked them. And hopefully it works. It's called When We Gather with the Dead. Born September 8th, May 28th, April 25th, 1944, 1905, 1926. In Pinkling, Colorado, Idlewild, Tennessee, Moreland, Oklahoma, Cape Yakataga, Salt Lake City, Utah, Coos Bay, Oregon, in Sellewick, in Detroit, Michigan, in Akiak. At an early age, his family moved, came to Alaska in 1960, joined the U.S. Navy in 1943. In 1970, they moved to Kodiak. Left home as a teenager, surveyor on the North Slope and on the Cooper Lake hydroelectric project. Began working at the Independence Mine, employed by the Alaska Railroad for many years. In 1981, he met and married Cecilia. While working at Whitney, he met Betty. Married in 1960 to Marvin. He married his second wife in 1954. His boat, the Elva B, sank in 1973. Returned to Alaska in 1946. Was with the Anchorage Police Department during the 1964 earthquake. After the earthquake, he was a volunteer cook for 2 weeks. She was instrumental in setting up a permanent fund for the shareholders. Postmaster there for 37 years. Worked in a cannery, preserved wild berries, fished out of Juneau for a while. Owner of the Beachcombers Bar, competed in Special Olympics. Hunted, fished, and trapped from Katala to Icy Bay. Army paratrooper, Tlingit matriarch, proud survivor of the Walking Dead Marine Battalion, South Vietnam, 1968. Enjoyed bowling, going to the mall, pool, and puzzles. Loved the outdoors and walking the beaches. Enjoyed gunsmithing and the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. Member of the Orthodox Church. Tough and competitive, but very fair. A devoted wife and grandmother. Wicked sense of humor and an endless supply of puns. The best smoked salmon dip in the world. February 9th, 1999, at the Alaska Native Medical Center. March 10th, in Seattle. Suddenly, at her home, Friday, January 29th, at Providence Hospital, at the Palmer Pioneer Home, while traveling in British Columbia, in a car accident in Anchorage, from melanoma skin cancer, on his boat, in her sleep. Preceded by her parents and brother, leaves behind his wife of 35 years, survived by his children and their spouses, by his wife, by her husband, by his sons, his parents, stepsons, her sisters and nieces, his son and daughter-in-law, 14 grandchildren, numerous relatives, great-grandchildren, nieces and nephews, by her pet dogs. June 4th, at the high school commons. Wednesday at 2 p.m. Saturday, 1 p.m. 4 p.m. today. Arrangements by Eagle River Funeral Home. Potluck will follow. In lieu of flowers, the family requests deposited directly at National Bank of Alaska, to the Salvation Army, to the John Wayne Cancer Institute. Burial will be at Idlewild Cemetery. Her ashes were taken to Cordova. In accordance with her wishes, there will be no services.
Well, ask me, where do you come from all that bullshit? How do you write that stuff down? I'd like to do that. I think I can do a better job of doing so. I decided, well, this time I'm going to do something instead of down on my C grade or something. I thought I would give you the technical inside scoop of how I do it. Hope you can use something now. Hope this isn't too dry for you guys to sleep. It's called Waiting on Inspiration. Damn blank piece of paper just keeps on staring me down. Swear I just heard a laugh as I glared with my best crown. Here alone in my galley, it's late at night or early morning. But can't sleep, can't walk away from words swirling half for me. Boats, surges, and rocks from another blast of wind, but still that blank page mocks at me. When will inspiration begin? My mind just back this fantastic summer. Never saw fishing like that before. Still in awe of those giant sets. Can't believe that final score. Sure wish I could write a poem about the excitement of those quick loads coming fast. Adrenaline pumping so high. I can do that line, sure. Sure wish I could write a poem about it, the excitement of those quick coming loads. Adrenaline pumping so high.
cold. Crew cheering as we head to unload, boat full, not much past noon. The boys share my feeding frenzy, we'll be back again real soon. Oh, I wish I could find inspiration to describe the beauty in which I work. The rugged mountains, teeming sea life, but words prove elusive, so I try not to shirk. And still a blank page marks, I consider the beauty of this boat. The high flaring bow and sweeping sheer make her one of the most graceful ones afloat. She seems to sparkle and dance across the water. I swear she surges ahead with joy. As we run in pursuit of fish, I feel a kid is my favorite toy. Or I wish I could capture the anticlimax of having to put boat and gear away. Sure, it happens every year, but I always dread that dismal day. Can't seem to find the words I need, even though this essentially is my life. Well, maybe that point would be argued by a self-exiled, landlocked wife. So here I sit, staring at this empty page, and the damn thing keeps staring back at me. Oh, I really want to write a poem so a slice of my life folks can see. Well, damn, it's cracking daylight. Still can't find inspiration in my head. Oh, hell with it. Seems I lost the showdown. I think I'll just go to bed.